So the car is running great. Couldn't be more excited. What do you think, Aria? She don't know what to think. Say, Daddy, your car's so loud. The plan for this video, what we're going to be doing is lowering the rear of my 1997 Mustang SVT Cobra. I've already lowered the front. It's a pretty similar process, but the way that I'm going to be doing it is going to make things a lot simpler. So I'm actually going to be removing everything and replacing everything with new. So of course we do have the actual lowering springs. These are supposed to lower the car about 1.5 inches or 2 inches. These are SR Performance springs, based on a lot of research and testimonies of people that have these on their cars. This seemed like the best value for your money. They run around $150 or so. Then I went ahead and went with SR Performance shocks. So we got the shocks for the left and the rear. The install on these is going to be fairly simple too. And I went ahead and purchased some new quad shocks. These are steering dampener shocks that connect from the body of the car to the rear axle. These will eliminate wheel hop and make the ride a little bit smoother. Like as I mentioned before, I don't have any issues with the rear of the car. The car drives fine, but I just wanted to refresh everything since everything's 30 years old. And then of course, to tie it all in together, we got new lower control arms and new upper control arms for the rear, and they are tubular steel design. The welds look really good on here, so I'm really happy with the construction of them. I just went with an off-brand with the control arms. They do have polyurethane bushings, and they even sent all new grade 10.9 hardware for everything. So I think this is going to be a fairly simple install. Considering I'm going to be removing everything that's old and replacing everything that's new. I did also purchase new spring isolators for the rear as well. New polyurethane spring isolators. So I'll be putting those on the springs as well. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get the wheel off of the car and then show you what we're going to be doing exactly, give you a better look once I get the wheel off and everything's in view. So I did just want to take a moment to kind of go over all the tools and supplies that you're going to need if you're going to be doing something as in-depth as what I'm doing. You may just be replacing one of these parts, but if you're going to do it all, this is everything you're going to need. Of course, you're going to need good sources of light. I have a shop light that works on a reel. These magnetic lights are also great for sticking in weird places when you need to get some light up in there. You're gonna need some thread locker, medium strength, some PB blaster to get those stubborn fasteners loose. You're gonna need some general purpose red lithium grease. Also, things you may need, a regular hammer. This is a framing hammer, a tire iron. You could use a pry bar too, I suppose, but I just prefer the tire iron. A pair of needle nose pliers, a punch for removing some of the bolts that have to be tapped back through, a rubber mallet. You're going to need a breaker bar, and also an extension for the breaker bar, a 13/16 socket for your lug nuts or whatever size yours may be, an 18mm socket, a 16mm socket, swivel socket. You're also going to need a 15mm socket, a 10mm socket, and a 13mm socket. And then you'll also need a 19mm socket, 2 different 19s actually. If you end up buying the same kit, it has 19 and well, the upper control arms are 19 and 19, so you will need 2, and then another 18mm socket. If you're using, of course, you're going to need ratchets for those sockets. You got a 3/8, a 1/2 inch, and then I love this ratchet. It's an extendable 1/4 inch or 3/8 ratchet with a comfort grip. I love this thing because if you're having trouble breaking something loose, you can just extend it out, and it's like having a cheater bar in there. A razor blade. If you use an impact driver, these things are great for putting on the sockets. You're also going to need some other various extensions. There's a 3/8 and a 1/4 inch extension. And then you're going to need a 15mm wrench, 15mm ratcheting wrench, a 16mm ratcheting wrench, and an 18mm ratcheting wrench. Some various vice grips. Then you're also going to need a grinder with a cutting wheel just in case. This is kind of optional. I ended up having to use it. You may too if you're working on something this old. Then of course the big boy impact, just in case the impact driver isn't cutting it. And then safety, you know, some goggles, some gloves. And then this little tool comes in handy too, for prying the clips off in the trunk that hold the carpet down whenever you need to get to the shocks. So, oh yeah, and a heat gun for them fasteners that won't break free. You heat them up real nice and hot. And I believe that's about it. So, and this isn't an ad or anything, but this Milwaukee impact driver, let me tell you, this thing has a 1/4 inch chuck, so it just takes like your little drill bits. I use this thing to take lug nuts on and off of my car. This Gen 3 M18 impact driver is crazy powerful. I mean, it has even on my 1/2 inch impact driver bit, it's impact rated, and it's twisted the shaft. So yeah, just want to throw it in there. If you got an extra 150, 200 bucks laying around, this is a great investment. So now that I have the wheel off the car, it'll be a little bit easier to show you up close exactly what we're going to be doing here. To get the rear end of the car in the air, I do recommend jacking the car up under the center of the differential, but you don't want to do it where the cover is there on the end. You want to go back behind it and lift from right there, and then you're going to place your jack stands just on the opposite side of where your control arm bolts to your torque box on both sides. That's the factory recommended lift point for these SN95 cars. So just better to be safe than sorry. We are going to be replacing this steering dampener here, the actual shock, the actual spring, and then the control arm that the spring is sitting on. So after you get the wheel off of the car, the first thing you're going to want to do is put a jack up underneath of the control arm of whatever side you're working on. You'll put a 15mm wrench on the inside and an 18mm socket on the other side. I knew that I was going to be doing this repair for like the past month or so. So like every couple of days I'd come back here and spray these with PB Blaster, and they were still pretty tough to get off. So any kind of lubricant is definitely your friend here, so just keep that in mind. So this is going to be your first step, is getting this this shock loose, and then we're gonna go up to the top of the trunk and loosen it up there, and then get the new shock dropped down in place. Then we'll move on to the quad shock. I did want to also mention, to remove the bolt from inside there, you're gonna want to use like a rubber mallet or a dead blow hammer so you don't damage the threads on there. So after spinning this with the ratchet for a couple minutes, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere, and an impact won't fit in here. So this was the best way I could come up with to keep the stud from spinning while you're removing this nut here. So you're just gonna lock some vice grips on it, and as you can see, now the stud no longer spins. You just need a 15mm ratcheting wrench and a pair of vice grips. Next, you're going to be removing the bolt for the bottom side of the quad shock where it connects to the axle. It's a 15mm. What I did was I put my ratcheting wrench on here and I smacked it a few times with my rubber mallet to break it free, and now it's coming loose. But of course, like I said, I've been soaking these bolts in PB Blaster like once a week for the past month, so everything's a little bit easier for me. Then your top bolt for your quad shock is going to be an 18mm nut. It seems to me like the stud is made into the car, and then you just kind of put the shock on and then sink and then tighten down your nut. So, next order of business, you're of course going to remove the bolts that are holding your sway bar to the control arm. And impact drivers make this a lot easier. Then you're going to want to remove this 10mm nut from the frame. It's just holding the bracket that holds your brake line in, so that you just want to remove that so there's plenty of slack when we go to lower down this side of the axle. This next part's a little tricky. If you're replacing the upper control arms like I am, then you'll need to do this as well. If not, then just skip over this part. But it's going to be an 18mm on both sides, the bolt and nut side, to get the lower bolt of the upper control arm off. So I did want to mention, make sure you support your axle before you start messing with this. But I had no idea, but apparently there's actually a bushing that stays on the rear axle. Is this something that can be replaced? I've never heard of anyone replacing this, but now that I'm into it this far, I'd really like to replace mine. So I'm gonna look into it and see what it takes to replace these bushings on the top of the axle, but I just thought that was pretty odd. So now I just need to remove the bolts on the upper part of the upper control arm, and then we can get the new upper control arm in place. And voila, we have the rear upper control arm for the passenger side off. As you can see, the factory is just a stamped steel design. They're still, very tough. But since I was freshening everything up, I just wanted to head and go with this tubular design. I feel like it's gonna make the rear end just that much more sturdy. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the upper control arm in place before I start messing with the lower control arm. And then we'll break these nuts loose here on the lower control arm, if you can see them there. And then lower this arm down, get the spring out of there, and then we'll get the new lower control arm in place. The sway bar here, seems like it has like a retainer clip with the threads on the backside, so I'm hoping that is the case so that we can get these bolts into the new control arms. But yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and get the new upper control arm in place. As you can see, I have the upper control arm in place. I have the bolts in the top, but I wanted to mention, make sure that you lubricate all the bushings with red lithium grease. And before you torque down the top, you're going to want to get the bolt at least through the bottom before you start torquing down the top, because it can twist a little bit and make it hard for you to get the bottom of the control arm in place. Like I said, I'm lubricating everything up with just some red lithium grease. It makes everything slide on a lot easier. Now, the next thing that you're going to do to get this spring out safely, we have everything unhooked on the passenger side. The sway bar, the shock, the new upper control arms in place. You're going to want to place a jack stand under the opposite side of the car. I also have a floor jack here all the way up to like an inch below it so that it can kind of stop it from dropping too far. And then your floor jack is going to be over here on this side. You're going to release it slowly to release the tension off of the spring. Make sure you do it slowly because the spring has a lot of pressure under it and it can come flying out of there. So just take your time when you're lowering it down and everything will go smoothly for you. So I'm gonna go ahead and lower it down really fast and pull that out, and then we'll look at getting the lower control arm replaced. So I got the spring out of there. You're going to want to be very careful doing that. I actually stuck my pry bar down in there and pried it up over top of the axle. That was probably not the best way to do it because it compressed it, and when I finally got it up over the axle, it shot out and smashed my thumb here. No big deal, that's to be expected, getting hurt a little bit, but just be careful when you're getting that spring out of there because, as I said before, it has a lot of pressure on it. So now I went ahead and took a 18mm socket for the lower control arm bolt and broke the nut loose. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish removing this bolt, and then we're gonna move up to the front here. They're actually inside of the torque box, and remove those, and then we'll get the new control arm in place. And to make life a little bit easier, since these bolts are up inside of the torque box, the other side is very similar. It's indented inside of the box. Especially if you're on your own, I used a breaker bar with an extension. That way I could just stick it in there, and the tension from the floor kept the bolt from spinning while I turned it from the outside here, and then the bolt just came out real easily. So of course, you know, if you've ever worked on vehicles before, not everything always goes as planned. I was putting a lot of tension on the sway bar when I was removing the lower control arm on the passenger side. So I decided to come and loosen the sway bar on the driver's side, and these little clip nuts that hold the sway bar to the control arm broke off on me. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this little clip inside of here is making the bolt just spin and spin and spin. So I'm gonna have to cut it with a cutting wheel and then get new hardware for this. So I do have a little bonus for you guys if the camera can focus here. I'm also going to be replacing the emergency brake cables because mine were pretty worn out. This is where it goes into the car. There's like a T there that connects to both of these cables. These cables are locked in here really tight, and it's really tricky to get them out. But what you're gonna do is slide, I don't remember exactly what size it is, but off of the feel of it, it feels like it's around 13mm. You'll slide a 13mm deep well socket down over top of this clip, and it'll make it to where you can push it out the back side. And then of course, you're going to unhook it from the rear of the car right here. We're gonna hook it from the rear caliper and then pull it all out, and then you're going to thread your bracket onto your new line. Yeah, so the lower control arm bolt will not come out. I've hit it with the big impact. I've hit it with the breaker bar. It's like I took the nut off and it just spins freely inside of there. I've tried beating it with a hammer, it won't come off. So I guess we're gonna have to cut this out as well. I'm gonna slide my cutting wheel up in there and cut it from the inside on both sides. Luckily I have all new hardware and all new control arms, so I ain't gotta worry about you know, scarring these up. I'm gonna go ahead and get that cut off, and then we can start getting all the new equipment up under this driver's side or passenger side. So getting this lower bolt on the lower control arm out is becoming a lot more difficult than what I had anticipated. This is just absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. I think I'm burning my arm hair off. Yep, there goes all my arm hair. Yeah, so this lower control arm bolt was froze inside of the bushing. So, yeah, finally got the thing out of there. All right, as you can see, I got the new lower control arm in place. The supplied hardware comes with 19mm bolts and 19mm lock nuts with washers. So I found, and you know, of course you want to that it's best to lube these bushings up with some chassis grease, red lithium, to get them to slide up into place. So I'm going to go ahead and get my lowering spring in here with the isolators, and then we're going to jack everything up and get the bolt in the lower control arm here. So in order to tighten this up, it's the same kind of deal taking it off. If you just try to put a ratchet on it, the actual stud spins. So you have to put some channel locks on the nipple on the top of the stud and then tighten the nut with the ratcheting wrench. If you don't have ratcheting wrenches, then I feel bad for you, because you're just going to be doing a quarter turn at a time with the regular wrench, but you're just going to do it until these bushings squeeze down nice and tight. All right, so it's best to, I had to figure this out the hard way, go ahead and bolt your lower control arm. I know it seems like it doesn't make sense, but bolt your lower control arm up and then get your spring in after you've bolted the lower control arm up. And you do have to pry at it that's why I kind of bent my piece here. But after you just keep raising the axle, lowering the axle, you know, moving it around, and eventually you'll get it in a spot to where you can compress that spring enough to get it in there. I actually used a tire iron to get it on there, so it worked out really well. Yeah, now the next step is we've got the upper control arm in, we got the lower control arm in, we've got the spring in, we got the shock in. So what we're going to be doing next is raising this side of the axle up until we can get the bolt through the bottom of the shock. And then we're going to be installing the new quad shock that connects from the top of the axle to this stud back here. So I'll go ahead and get everything straightened out and then touch base with you. And by the way, just a little quirk of the factory hardware. I try to reuse the factory hardware anytime I can. Like, for instance, like on these lower shock bolts, you see I almost got it lined up. I'm getting ready to put the bolt through. But the nuts on these grade 9.8 bolts are ovaled. So it makes it harder getting them on and off, but once you torque this thing down, it is not going to back itself off because of that oval pinch that it has to it. Your front A-arms, your control arms in the front are made this way also. So I just thought that was a pretty cool design that I would bring it up. So with the factory hardware, I always just take it to my bench. I have a bench grinder with a wire wheel on it, clean the bolts up. You can see this looks almost new. So I'm gonna get this bolt in here real quick. Just wanted to mention that. All right, so after you get your shock lined up and get the bolt through it down here, you're going to put your brake line bracket back in place. And then in your case, your e-brake's probably fine, so you're just going to modify this bracket, you're going to cut this little tab off of the bracket here so that it's able to mount up flush with the new control arm you have, or you can bend it, but it's just going to look better if you cut it, and then your bolt will go through and attach to the sway bar on the other side. Unfortunately, in my case, my e-brake cables were trashed. They're absolutely terrible, so I'm going to be replacing them with some brand new cables. So I'm going to modify the bracket, go ahead and get it installed on my new cable, and then get that up in there. But pretty much that's everything for the passenger side. We got our lower control arm, we got our upper control arm, we got our brand new shock, we got our brand new spring, we got brand new isolators in there as well. And of course we have the quad shock installed now. So that's everything for this side of the car. While I was away, I did go ahead and get to work on the driver's side of the vehicle. I got the upper control arm installed, and I got the spring out of there and the shock disconnected. So I'm going to kind of breeze through this side and not be quite as descriptive as I was for the other side, because it's just rinse and repeat. So I'm going to go ahead and get all this taken care of, and then we'll move on to the next step, which is going to be torquing down the control arms. The upper and lower control arms should not be torqued while the car is in the air. So you're going to torque them once you get load on the wheels. So we'll get the car up on cribs. If you're not familiar with cribs, it's I'm making myself out of 2x4s. So it gets the car up in the air about 2 feet, but the weight is still on the wheels. So we'll get the car up like that to torque everything down. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get all this stuff installed on this side and then be right back at you. As you can see, we now have the passenger side done. The new Gabriel quad shock, the SR Performance lowering springs, the new lower control arms, the new upper control arms. Everything went on great. It was a little tricky getting the control arms in place, but just remember, just keep moving the axle around, raising it up, lowering it, and everything will line up. One tip though, the axle will tend to roll forward, and you'll see your drive shaft drooping. And if that starts to happen, your holes will not line up for your control arms. So like I mentioned earlier, you want to put your jack past the diff cover and up here on the flat part of the actual differential. That way it keeps the axle shifted forward so that everything lines up correctly. When I was getting the lower control arm in on this passenger side, I did have to wiggle things around a little bit. I even went and unhooked the shock on the driver's side, but everything is done. All that's left to do is put the wheels back on the car and then crawl up under it and torque the upper and lower control arms down and put all the carpet back in the trunk, of course. But yeah, this video actually took 2 nights to finish because I am a father, hence the Millennial Dad name on the channel. I did want to give a shout out though to Tough Stuff Performance, the guys that I bought the alternator off of. I left them a review and made that YouTube video, and they sent me a hat and a catalog, real nice hat. I got it hanging up on the wall. I don't want to get it dirty. If you notice, I wear this Supreme beanie to tick off all of the hype beasts out there. $150 beanie, and I roll around on the garage floor and wipe the grease off my hands with it. But yeah, this video was really fun to make, and I hope that it helps somebody out there that's trying to do a suspension job on their vehicle. This is applicable to all 79 to 2004 Mustangs. Mine just happens to be a 1997 SVT Cobra, but if you've got a Mustang from 1979 to 2004, all of this applies. And yeah, I can't wait to get on the road and see how the rear end feels. There was nothing wrong with the rear end, but everything, the way I am, I just wanted everything to be brand new under there, make me feel a lot better about it. So yeah, I think in the coming weeks, I may be doing a video on replacing some power steering lines and stuff. I haven't quite decided yet if I'm going to do that or not, because I have a slight leak where the high pressure line goes into the pump, but that happens on all these cars, and it's like one drip every few days. So I'm not that concerned about it, but in the same sense, I fixed everything else, so might as well do that too. But yeah, if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I really hope that you take the half a second out of your day to hit that subscribe button, because it means the world to me that you subscribe to this channel. Whether people watch it or subscribe or not, I'm still gonna make videos because I enjoy it. But yeah, like, subscribe, comment. Thanks.